This is the final Ballantines True Music Series episode, and I get to end it off with the master himself, Kid Fonque. In this session, he'll be in the hot seat, and he'll be chatting to me, radio presenter, colleague, and friend, Nick Hammond. Today, I get to take you guys through his true music journey, find out what he enjoyed most about the series, and talk about the vital part he's played in South Africa's electronic music and club culture. Alan, I'm really happy that you asked me to do this, and I'm honored that you asked me to do this as well. I've been watching all the Stay True Music series of Ballantines interviews that you've been doing, and I think what's cool and important about it is that it's a rare opportunity to document in long form stories about South African artists and creators, and I think you've done a fantastic job so far, and I hope that I can do an all right job interviewing you.
I think you're going to smash it.
So I was thinking about this because, you know, I think you're sort of somebody you're a household name of the underground, right? And you're somebody who, as much as is a DJ and a producer, you're also a father and you're a husband, and you're somebody who music is 100% of your life in every way. So if you're not working, you're still involved in your passion.
Sure.
It's your entire being. And now you have one of the most popular Sunday shows on Radio Selective Styles, where you, every Sunday, give South Africa the latest and best in things that are going on in your world. But I think the original Selective Styles was back in the 70s with your father when he would put together mixtapes on a Sunday.
100%.
Tell me about that. Tell me about those early days and the kind of music that he was into.
Oh man, it was just so like, our household was just music, and it was just anything that my father felt. So I mean, if he was always trying to discover stuff. So I mean, there was no real internet. He was buying music magazines, and he comes from like that era of Woodstock and, you know, the hippie kind of generation. And he essentially looks like one. He's got a big beard and long hair. And yeah, it was just this, my first recollection of real, something that touched me was Michael Jackson. When he got Michael Jackson's album, Thriller, and I was 6 or 7 at the time. That really like made an impact on me. That was like something I could feel. And me and him had this connection musically because he was always bringing music home. And we landed up probably in my early teens going to CD Warehouse in Mutual Square in Rosebank. It was the biggest store that brought in imported CDs. And this place was a buzz, it was a vibe. And we would go, that would be our Sunday trip. So we lived in the West Rand, and we'd drive like an hour to Rosebank. And we'd go in, and he was trying to find and explore and, you know, hear music. And I was on my own journey. And he tried to influence me. Obviously there was a lot of music that he really liked that I took to. Probably the biggest artist from there is John Martin, that folk but very electronic. And then he got a compilation called Rebirth of Cool. I'm not sure if you remember Rebirth of Cool.
Rebirth of Cool came out later. That was like in the 90s, wasn't it?
Yeah, early 90s, but it really felt like things, musically it kind of made sense to me. It was like, this is what I want to do. I was just a fan. I was just like, I just dig music. So I was like, anything that really moved me, I got properly into Alice Cooper, like crazy into Alice Cooper, which you wouldn't really say. When I was, exactly, I mean, I had posters, I had his videos, I had everything. But when Rebirth of Cool came out, it was a compilation that had various styles on it, but it all sounded similar, or it all had like the same emotion, if you will. And it was all jazzy, and it was all quite future. So you had people like DJ Crush next to Beastie Boys, next to Saint Germain, next to some drum and bass. And I was like, this makes sense to me. This is what I want to do. And then I really started digging and exploring more of the artists that were coming out of those compilations. So I was getting like early DJ Vadim albums on his label Jazz Fudge, and like really experimental stuff from that era.
Guys like Mo Wax, Ninja Tune, all that sort of stuff.
Still my favorites. I mean, that for me is the foundation of Kid Fonque, is exactly those labels. Ninja Tune, Mo Wax were kind of huge in the UK for experimental electronic music. And it wasn't one tempo. It was always when I started DJing, it took me a while to kind of like find my feet because I was into all this weird stuff, if you will, and everyone else was into like techno or house. White Horse, the club, was very, very big in my college, and you'd go there and it was just house music. So you could just pick a house record from there and a house record from there and it would work. Whereas with what I was into, you had to really think about it because the tempos were so different. It was just, I liked the music. So it took me a little bit longer to try and get the DJing thing right with what I liked.
Do you remember when you were at Roodepoort College?
Yes.
There was a radio station at the college.
Yes.
You managed to get some sort of a lunchtime slot there, and that's
where the DJing started. I mean, for me, I was just a music fan. I was just crazy into music. And then I went to Roodepoort College and landed up, like you said, being on there was a week schedule. So every single day, Monday to Friday, there was a DJ and a genre. So like Rob would do Monday, that was techno. John would do Tuesday, that was house. And I got a slot, and I was playing the maddest music to these kids. I mean, they'd never heard anything like it. The thing is, you weren't mixing. You were just playing tunes, because they would have a CD player. You remember the old CD players with the little pitch controls on the top?
Yes, that's pretty much all you can do, though.
Exactly, and two faders. So that was my first experience with something that was kind of built for DJs. It was a CD player underneath. So I wasn't mixing, I was just kind of playing songs. But it was all about collecting those songs. So I was constantly working, saving money, buying music. And then I became so obsessed with it, I was like, the next step is to get onto vinyl. Because with vinyl at that time, you could actually DJ. Because the pitch was much bigger. And every other DJ, that was their format. You couldn't DJ seriously or be taken seriously if you're just pressing play on CD players. And that sent me overseas to just go get my first box of vinyl.
And that would have been about, I would imagine, sort of late 90s, 96, 97, around
97,
that time.
Yeah.
You went to Brighton in the UK. You were there for a year. You went there to work and you went there to collect records, basically.
100%.
Tell me about that time in your life.
Well, I mean, the record stores in South Africa, me and my friends were very committed to buying music. So every single weekend or every single time we had money, we would go and buy records just so that we could DJ. But every time I went to these places, they never had what I liked. It was always what Tim White or Vinny was bringing, or G-Force. These are the guys that were bringing the music in. Not that they had bad taste, it's just my taste was different. And I was really, really committed to like the music I liked. And I knew that there was this big scene in the UK, at least from what I'd be seeing. And in my head, I'd like imagined this massive scene of like beat music, trip hop, Mo-Wax, whatever you want. And I went over and bought back my first case of music that I genuinely liked. You know, the difference is if someone had to bring in DJ Shadow, it would land up in the sales bin. And just to fast forward a bit, they actually got to a time where I was buying records where we would not buy a specific record knowing that it would go into the sale bin and then buy it then, just because of my music taste. But I think that was the kind of change for me, was going overseas, making sure I bought what I liked, learning how to DJ somewhat, coming back, and then it felt like I was being taken seriously. Because I could actually do the DJ. I could actually put a record on and mix another record of music that I really liked.
But I imagine at the time, I mean, like, still being in the West Rand of Johannesburg, when you come back, there was a lot of, like, techno was the big thing back then. And it was really important, especially if you were like heavy into the scene, to be a purist. You play techno, that's what you do. So you're coming back now with all these different influences. You must have found it quite hard to fit in, because most people would have said to you, you can't do that. You can't play a set with more than one genre.
I got told that many times. And it was slightly confusing. But then as my journey through life carried on, I found DJs, big DJs overseas, that were doing exactly what I wanted to do. And it was kind of like no rules. And for me, that was kind of like the confirming factor that you can. There are no rules. You don't have to just be like, just play techno, just play house. I think once I found that out, once I discovered Giles Peterson, it was just like, okay, it's totally cool to actually pick a song that's great and play that over picking a song that works. I think there's a really big difference. And that became my focus from there on. And fortunately, with the people that I surrounded myself with, it led to my first residency, Tour 6, where it was the essential start for Kid Fonque to do what he wants. And we had a dance floor, and we had like a committed weekly DJ kind of setup that we would go and do exactly what we wanted to do and represent what we liked.
I don't know too much about Tour 6. Like, I think, you know, maybe I'm giving my age away here, but you're not as young as you look.
Thank you.
But I do know that every DJ that wants to become any good at what they do has to get a residency and cut their teeth. And I know that Tour 6 was that for you. I know that you had a Tuesday thing there.
Yeah.
But my understanding of the story is that you and a guy called Scott Smith basically had to beg the owner to let you to sort of set up your own kind of a party. Is that right?
Yeah, there was, so Scott was playing techno, and I kind of grew friends, him and Sean, because they had turntables. I didn't have turntables. I had great records, but I didn't have turntables. So I found these guys that had turntables, and they were playing techno, and I ended up spending a lot of time with them because I could get access to their decks and do my thing. And we became friends, and Scott saw my record collection, and for the first time he was like, oh my word, this music's amazing. We can't find it here. And it was, he became very interested in it. And how it happened was there was a guy in my life, Donovan. He was just he is a really enthusiastic character. And Tour 6, he knew the owner, I knew the owner. I think everyone knew who Alan from Tour 6 was. And he just forced us in there. Donovan, if it wasn't for Donovan, I wouldn't have had the residency. And he was like, listen, what we'll do is we'll bring Alan and Scott Smith. They'll bring the speakers, they'll bring the turntables, they'll bring their records, they'll bring everything, they'll set up at the back. Let's see how it goes. And we did that. Scott, I didn't have a car, so Scott was living in kind of Randburg area, and he was driving away from Tour 6 to pick me up. Then drive all the way to Tour 6, which is in Louisburg, so maybe that's an hour drive. Get there, we had home stereo stuff, so it was like speakers, cables, turntables, set everything up, and then we'd play the whole night. And we had a very much a theme, so you like start chilled, trip hop, build it up, and we would kind of bounce between us, and also constantly collecting music so that we had something new to play every single week. And it got to the point where I had a job working at a music retail store, Look and Listen, and I was like, this is too much. Like, I can't do that. I wasn't getting paid. I can't do this DJing thing till like 4 a.m. and then come to work. And so maybe about 2 months into it, I said to the owner, listen, can we do this every second Tuesday? And he said to me, no, I'm going to get you nice sound. You're just going to have to bring your records and I'll pay you. And I was like, you can get paid to do what you love? This is insane. And that's what changed it for me. Then I was committed, and it was like 3-4 years of my life. Scott landed up moving on. And Troy Lilly, Troy's been a very big part of my life. He worked at Sugar Tracks, which was before Soul Candy. And he worked at the record section, selling records. And we became very good friends, and he landed up doing the residency with me for about 2 years. And we really, really connected musically because he was bringing in all the weird stuff because he was working at a record store and he was producing it. And we were essentially doing what we wanted. It was kind of the beginning of broken beats and new jazz. And we were really, really on top of that scene, really excited about it, and we would rep that. I mean, we were playing to, couldn't have been more than 50 people every Tuesday. But the fact is, it was a courtyard at the back of a club that held maybe 300 people inside. So we would get the people coming to have a smoke or a drink or whatever, and then we kind of created a community around what we were doing at the back.
Do you think that younger DJs are losing out on not having as much of a culture of playing 3-4 hour sets? as was the case back in the day?
To be honest, it's not something I really think about often. I think the scene has changed a lot. I think, I just, in my head, I think about so many different things, because back in those days, I wasn't in the commercial space at all. So all I had was my view, and it was about what I liked. But whereas I know a lot of the commercial guys here in the scene, just kind of they're in my space, very, very cool people, but it's definitely different how they come up to mine. Theirs is all about playing songs that work for a dance floor. Whereas for me, I come from the background of you break something and that's what makes you a DJ. And I don't think there's either a wrong or right. I just think it's what works for you. And I've come from that culture of trying to find or trying to get something amazing and play it for people for the first time. And that to me has always been what a DJ stands for. But like I said, probably in those days, there were DJs that had to play stuff that was playing on radio and get everyone revved up. But it's just my viewpoint. And that's kind of how I've stuck to, or how I've been. I mean, that's what, 20 years ago. And I'm still trying constantly to find something to play someone and for them to go, wow. And I want to be the person that breaks it. And I think it's just a different mindset. I think it's a different type of DJ. And there are so many different types of DJs. But the longevity, the length of sets, I think it's very much my age group. I speak to Vinny, or I speak to Christos, or I speak to the guys who are kind of like a generation ahead of me, and more than happy to play 3-4 hour sets. Still, to this day. I mean, Vinny's over 50, if I'm not mistaken. He often says like 1 hour sets must fall. But I know so many DJs would play 5-6 hour, 1 hour sets over a weekend. And I get booked for them myself. But you don't really get to explore a DJ's knowledge or a DJ's expression in a way. And I think that's what a DJ should be through 1 hour. I think times have changed.
They have.
Indeed.
But at the same time, you've remained uncompromised. And I think that that's a rare thing in today's world. And I would imagine, well, I don't know, because I'm not in your mind, but I would imagine for somebody like you, that has to be very, very close to who you are as a person, because we live in a world where it's very easy to be tempted to do things that you know are not necessarily in the best interest of what you think is right for you. And I wonder if you feel like that's still something you have to constantly challenge within yourself to make sure that you're doing Kid Funk and not something that would maybe be a shortcut somewhere else.
I think you've hit it on the head. It's a constant thing for me. And I think it's not a thing that I have to like wake up in the morning and I'm like, am I being true to me? It's just, it's an integrity thing. And I think my life has taken a journey that I wanted it to take, and it's not been easy for most of the part, but it's got me to where I am. And I mean, I still pinch myself that I have a radio show on national radio doing what I want. Not what I've been told, but doing what I want, which is very rare in this country, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think it's very much a thing in Europe, a little bit in the States, but to have like tastemakers, like people that have been through and have kind of got their little badge of kind of being in a scene or having the knowledge that they do. So for me, I can't sleep at night if something doesn't sit well with me. So I'll always go with what really fits. Do you know what I mean? And I think because I've been doing it for so long, if I do something that doesn't feel right, you can tell straight away. And I think the thing that comes up weekly is because I have a weekly radio show, is I really like interviewing people on my show, and I really like bringing a kind of knowledge or a type of, like you're going to discover something and I'm going to show it to you on my show. But if I'm always asking, like, do I know someone well enough to bring them on my show? So I always find like sometimes there's pressure of like, you've got to have this guy on your show, you've got to have that guy. And if I don't resonate with their music, I generally don't have them on my show because you'll tell in 5 seconds flat that I actually don't know what I'm talking about. And I prefer to just keep things comfortable. And if I do know what I'm talking about, generally what comes out is a great show, which I'm happy with. And I haven't got to a position where I don't know what I'm not really keen on having someone on the show. But if I did, I'm telling you, it would fall on its ass.
I wanted to ask you about your days at Soul Candy.
Yes.
Because I know, you know, we've spoken about all these different influences and genres being a big part of your life, but I mean, Soul Candy, the time that you were there, that's primarily a house label. I mean, that's like the South African house authority. What was your level of understanding of house music at the time that you got there? I mean, was that your education? I mean, I think Brett Jackson was the guy,
Yes.
icon, legend, who
100%.
he passed away, and that's essentially how you came to have the job, right?
Sure.
Maybe with the context of him and why he's important, you can explain to me sort of how that developed or deepened your understanding of SA house music.
Well, I was in the same building. So I was sales manager, right, for what was called Boomerang Music, which was essentially the distribution house for Soul Candy, and then landed up becoming the distribution house for a lot of artists that wanted to go independent. Kent being one. There was a release from Black Hole, 80 Seconds, a big 80 Seconds, or I forget the name of the song, massive tune. Landed up becoming Soul Candy distribution, so it combined. So we're all under one roof. So you have Brett Jackson, Ricardo da Costa, A&R team, Tulani the Warrior, Andrew Cross, Harel Salka, all in this office, like picking up the hits and putting our compilations on Soul Candy. Then you have me downstairs in this massive warehouse, taking the product and taking it out to the streets. And I did that for years and years. And how I got the job was I worked for a Cape Town-based company called Curse Music. They were bringing in everything I loved. So everything that was really, really cool at the time, from labels like K7, Raw Fusion, the list goes on, Thievery Corporation, 18th Street Lounge, G-Stone, everything I loved about music, these guys were doing. And this was Curse Music. We were bringing it into South Africa and selling it onto retail. I was heading up Johannesburg. So Harel and Sergio, who were at Soul Candy, always kept an eye on me because I was selling them records. So occasionally we'd get a record that would do really well at Soul Candy, and I'd sell it to Harel. And he kept an eye. He was like, listen, I want you to come move to Soul Candy to do sales, just like you are. And I was like, but guy, listen, you guys don't do anything I like. And they said, well, bring the stuff that you like, let's make it work. And I moved over, and things moved on, and I landed up selling Soul Candy music. And I was still, again, never really into the house stuff. I liked it, and I was playing 115 at the time, which was a house club, but I'd always mix things up, so it'd be house and a bit of Latin, some broken beats that I was really into. But I wasn't like as into it as Brett Jackson and Ricardo. That was their life. I mean, if you look at the legacy that Brett's left behind, he's a producer, incredible DJ. He was DJing overseas at the time, which was a thing. He was kind of the right person for the job of A&R at Soul Candy. Then he got cancer, and he passed away, unfortunately. And everyone was like, who's the next guy going to be? And I think my work ethic was what they really liked, regardless of what my music taste was. And they were like, we want you to do it. And I'm like, but I'm not really I'm not Brett. And I'm not trying to be Brett. You can't be Brett. Brett was like perfect for the job. I'm like, I'm still going to be me, but this is obviously the right step for my career. I'm going to learn how to run a record label. And I did for 3 or 4 years, and I landed up putting together A&Ring and working with some of the best in the country. DJ Fresh, Euphonic. I had a lot to do with Julian Gomes' Love Song 28, which was kind of like what broke him. I did G Family's album prior to that, worked with Lula Cafe, worked with Ganyani, worked with, it did feel like a lot at the time because, like I said, I wasn't a purist at all of the scene, and I was learning as I was going. But as things went, I became good at it, and I enjoyed the creative side of it, like putting together videos and conceptualizing artwork and whatever. And my knowledge of house grew, as it would. I mean, you are what you surround yourself with, and I was just surrounded by deep house records the whole time. And I had opportunities to do Kid Funk stuff at Soul Candy, which I did, but I always ended up doing it my way. And I would always make sure that I didn't overstep because of my position. So I couldn't put like a 50,000 Rand budget into a Kid Funk project when I'm working on like a G Family album, because it would clearly be kind of
Conflict of interest.
Yeah, conflict of interest. And I didn't, I was very, very aware of it. So it always kind of left me as Kid Funk on the back burner and doing my job as the focus and moving forward with what I needed to do. But it was an incredible learning experience. Who I am today in regards to the music industry comes from the knowledge that I got at Soul Candy.
And what do you think it taught you about how to brand a DJ?
Wow, yeah, it's crazy, man, what you can do. There was a lot of thinking around just throwing money at projects, and sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. But there was, at some points of Soul Candy, there was ghost producers chilling in the back who would churn out music and give it to artists. And that artist would blow up off a song. And it turned into a machine. I never, for me as Kid Funk, that's why I had to kind of wear two different hats. I understood how the machine worked and I knew what the job was to do, but I never really wanted to fall into that. I always wanted to do what I wanted to do, which was always a little bit different from what Soul Candy was about. But they had some really, really good successes. Like Mikasa was probably one of the biggest. And the idea was to kind of replicate that, which it didn't work always. But it definitely taught me how to be a brand. I mean, I think one of the biggest, smartest brands to come out of Soul Candy, or someone that I was not close with, but I could watch and see how he does this thing, is Euphonic.
Sure.
Euphonic knows how to work a brand. And very interesting to be in that space and see how people do things and adapt it to what works for you. By no means at all am I even close to Euphonic, but interesting. And again, what they've done with Mikasa and a number of other brands. So yeah, like again, I think it all just comes down to probably one of my biggest learning experiences was almost just, although I was the label manager, just kind of seeing how everyone does their thing and learning the industry and learning how this whole big South African dance scene works. Because I didn't know the difference between Afro Tech and Deep House when I started, but I mean, I know everything now. So yeah, incredible experience for me.
And obviously after, just shy of half a decade of you being there, Soul Candy came to a close. But I remember a time, this would have been early noughties. There was a dance label, USM was its name.
Oh yes.
And you put out Lounge of the World, Sela del Mundo.
Sela del Mundo, yes.
Right?
Yes.
And I mean, that became pretty big. Like that did a lot for brand Kid Funk initially, right?
And it was, I almost felt like I was too young for it because I didn't expect it to do that well. I got asked, Erica Al and I were very good friends, and she worked at USM Records, and I was doing a lot of Latin, a lot of broken beats, a lot of bossa nova, new jazz type music, and I was able to bridge tempos very, very cleverly, and I would work out sets at home and like kind of focus on like an hour of like just an incredible journey and make it flawless. And Erica was like, I want you to release an album with USM. And USM was known for releasing deep house CDs. Right. I mean, they broke Ryan Dent. I remember working in retail with the Ryan Dent. That was their first album that came out. That thing sold out in a day. And they hadn't licensed half the songs. So there was this whole kind of controversial issue around USM. Nonetheless, I thought it was a bit of taking a chance for me to do what I really want to do. And I did, and to this day, I still get people like your Sela del Mundo albums on USM were like the best things I've ever heard in my life. And they were so different from anything that ever came out.
But didn't it also complicate your life a little bit as well? Because I remember stories about you would go and you'd play at places like in the north of the country, and they'd be expecting a certain thing, and you'd come with your understanding of what you were doing, and then that kind of put you in a bit of a space where you had to carefully work out who you were as a brand, right?
Yeah.
As a sound.
Yeah, I think there was a time where I was going home and saying to my wife, like, if this is what DJing is going to be like, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. Because I was going to these clubs that play commercial music. I just released an album, so my profile had gone up. I mean, it was album of the week in FHM. I'll never forget, because that was like a thing, dude, to have like a full page spread. So I think these guys in Santon were going album of the week, not even hearing the album, and booking me. So they didn't really have an understanding as to what I represented. And of course, I would come and do what I do. And then I'd land up with like bodybuilders around me while I'm DJing, asking me if like I'm going to play something they could dance to, and it was just terribly uncomfortable. And I'd never walk out of a gig feeling great. And I was just like, I can't do this anymore. I can't put myself in situations where I'm being forced to do something that I don't represent. And then I discovered Kitcheners. That to me was the beginning of what I genuinely, really, really wanted to do. And it started off a 7-year residency. I just completed another album with Soul Candy called Two Sides of the Beat. I was getting booked at Kitcheners. It's a small, second oldest bar in Johannesburg.
You're right, yeah.
And I was getting bookings to do what I wanted, but then I launched my album Two Sides of the Beat there, and we killed it. We did really, really well. People came for me to do what I wanted to do. And obviously in that space I could do an extended set, so I could do 5 hours and just go and do what I wanted to do, and start at 80 BPM and go on a journey. And people wanted to experience that. And once I discovered that that's what you could do in that space, I started a monthly residency, 7 years, I think last year. I called it quits, but that really, really gave me a home to do exactly what I wanted to do without like the threat of getting moord outside the club because you weren't playing the right music. People were coming to hear what you had to showcase. And I suppose that kept me DJing. You know, if it wasn't for Kitcheners, I probably would have thrown in the towel a while ago. So yeah, for me, it's always just been about finding those spaces that you can express yourself properly.
And to sort of just halfway through all of that, I mean, there was also the time you and Julian Gomes obviously had Stay True Sounds together. I mean, this was a project right after Soul Candy that you kind of opened up, and you were doing, I suppose, like electro soul music primarily. A lot of good stuff came out of that.
I still have Stay True Sounds. It's my little baby. Julian and I had always discussed that we'd grown very fond of each other, working through his Love Song 28 project and working on G Family. And we always said we'd like to work with each other at some capacity, but obviously I couldn't because I was employed by Soul Candy. And then when Soul Candy moved on and I got retrenched, he was the first person I called. I was like, dude, this is our calling. Like, let's do this. And he agreed. And we opened up Stay True Sounds. And yeah, man, it was an absolute, still is an absolute journey. Like, the main thing, it's incredible that, you know, when you put things out there, how things kind of come to you if it's the right decision. And as soon as we decided to do it, we just got the most incredible music ever. I mean, Bruce Loco was the first release. And if you look at where Bruce is now in his career, he's releasing music on Free Range overseas. He's doing stuff with And Me and kind of music. He's really, really like kicked off and discovering FKA Mash and CO. And, you know, we were just in this really beautiful space of unleashing all these hidden talents that we couldn't, I could never release the music at Soul Candy that we are releasing on Stay True Sounds because it's not hit driven, it's music driven. So it's always been music first. And Julian and I did this together for, I think, over a year. And we just two creatives and just kind of kept butting heads, and he decided it would be best if he moved on, and I carried on with the label, which we both agreed to. And I mean, Julian and I are still very, very close. He runs his own label now and does things how he needs to. But I think being in the position that I'm in, where I have kind of a radio show, speaking to people on a national level, being a DJ, being of influence in the music scene, I think it's the only thing to do is have a record label to actually keep discovering, keep giving people a platform to put their music out on, and kind of, yeah, it just makes sense, man. For me, it's the next step from Fonque, and it's just genuinely do exactly what I want to do and release exactly what I feel.
Do you feel a sense of accomplishment over the fact that you now have people that you can mentor who are aspiring to be more in the space that you've created, considering also the fact that when you started out, there was nobody?
Yeah, it's a funny thing. I feel like some of the kids I'm working with these days are just clued up, man. Like they're just so committed to what they're doing that they, like when I started off, I was just a pothead, like passionate about music. I mean, that's the truth. That's how it started. Whereas these kids are just like so clued up, like so focused, so I know exactly what they want to do. Yes, I license their music. Yes, I can represent them and obviously give them a platform if it makes sense on the radio show, and you know, do cool things with Ballantines with most of these artists. But most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, the guys that are doing well are the guys that are just really, really committed, like young 20-year-olds that have woken up and been like, I mean, I still think it's incredible, the story of Pierre Johnson, where he's just like, I'm gonna spend a year and learn production. I'm not doing anything else. That's what I'm gonna do. And you look at where he's at. I mean, I could never have done that at his age. I was too all over the place. And these guys are really making it. They're really like breaking down and waving our flag on that independent music level, because I think South Africa has broken out overseas more in the commercial aspect. Whereas kind of I think overseas for GOM is underground for them, whereas here it's relatively commercial. I think the music that I'm releasing through State True Sounds is the genuine underground of what's going on in South Africa, and these guys are finally breaking some doors down overseas, and I'm hoping that we can keep doing that.
Do you find that that's a tricky space to be in? Because right now, the world is super stoked on Africa, right? But in my perception of what goes on a lot of the time, the world wants to mine and commodify Africa. So they need something that's different, but it can't be too different. Right. So it has to fit a certain idea that they're vaguely used to. And then what the downside of that is, what can happen is once they're bored of this cycle of African influenced music, they'll go elsewhere. So they'll go back to Latin America, or they'll mine pop from within their own country. I mean, that's how the cycle of culture works. But if you're somebody who's uncompromisingly been on the, for lack of a better word, so-called underground, where I would argue from my perspective there is better music being made in the sense that it's true to artistic discipline far more than it is trying to pander to a trend. Do you find that it puts you in an interesting perspective in terms of how your music or the music that you're surrounded by is getting perceived globally?
I think that this is something that comes up often, is that there's this whole, anything that comes from South Africa has to be African. So lots of drums and African singing, vernac, or whatever. Whereas the music, I'm not looking for anything particular. I'm looking for something that moves me, which is generally not that. Occasionally it might be. It depends on the production. But you're exactly right. Trying to get something into a space that already exists. So Bruce Loco is making somewhat of a wave overseas, a small ripple, but I think he would do far better if it was more African. So I sampled Dave Martian's last EP that he did with State True Sounds with a European company, and they got back to me and they were like, well, it would do a lot better if kind of you leaned it more towards an African style. They pointed to an African artist. And I discussed it with Dave, and we're both just like, can't we just be music? can't we just be the same platform and as the rest of the world? Whereas you make it, those who come from your influences, and sometimes tribal drums and village people aren't your influences. So that's what you put out. But there is this huge expectation for success to come out of Africa must have those elements. So nothing's going to change on my side when it comes to licensing music, and it's a slow process. You know, the label's been open for less than 3 years. I still find that very, very young. And if I look at the labels that are doing well on a global scene in the underground space, they've been around for over 10 years. So I think it's about being consistent, and I think it's about just putting out what you feel. And at some point, something's got to give. You know what I mean?
You've also got Reckless on that label as well with D Malice.
Yeah, Reckless actually isn't signed to State
is it
Signs.
not?
No, we signed that project to a UK label, R2. Reckless comes from a relationship that I have with a dear friend in the UK. His name is D Malice. He had a massive garage tune 5-6 years ago. It was kind of a refix of Gabriel, DJ Spen track, which kind of, he was the man. He was the dude overseas. And he discovered Afro house music that was coming out of South Africa. And I discovered him through a friend at Soul Candy, and we got to know each other and then hung out at Amsterdam dance events and became very, very close friends. And we'd always been trying to produce together. And we have a deep love for 90s hip hop and soul. And we decided to do a project called Reckless, RKLS. To be honest, I don't think it's popped or done. There's probably like 4 people in the world that really like it. But
I quite like it. I think it's quite good.
But it's something that we had to do. It was just in us. And you know, we got it pressed up on vinyl overseas. It landed up in some like best of lists in the States, which is really, really cool. I can't say it kind of shifted mountains or changed anything for me, but it was definitely just something that we had to put out. And I'm very proud of that project. It's got incredible MCs from the States. It's got Kev Brown, it's got a CEO on there, you know, just the beginning of these guys' careers as well. Mello B. Jones, Dave Martian. I'm super proud of that project.
I mean, because you're going abroad at least once a year, right? And you're playing in the UK, and I know you do some stuff in Switzerland as well. And how do you find you're perceived there over, you know, on the other side of the world?
I think it's growing. It's something you've got to constantly keep at. And I think production is the key. People are not going to have you over just a DJ. You know, everyone's a DJ. So I think if you really want to make an impact, you've got to produce. And I had some success with a tune that I produced by myself called Two Sides, which I took a massive sample. It wasn't even a sample, I just took Theo Parrish's interview from, he was chatting to some guys on this DVD in Germany called Slices. And I really resonated with what he's talking about. And he's essentially saying, like, you know, are you picking tunes to play next to each other? Because you're going to pick average tunes, or you're picking tunes because they're great. And that got picked up by a couple of my peers overseas. And that kind of helped me kind of with gigs and more familiar around my name. But I have my debut album, which I've finally finished putting together, and that comes out this Friday. But I used the PR company in the UK to send it out, and the feedback from the people that I grew up with, I mean, these are people that I would completely, Jazz Nova, Giles Peterson, Rainer Truby, like really the people that influenced me, and now they're giving me 5 out of 5 for my album, or, you know, superb album is just, like, I can die now. It's going to be very interesting to see how the record does in South Africa, because a lot of people associate me with Deep House, and it's not a Deep House record. It has Deep House on it, but it's It's a musical record.
Mm.
And I think the older generation really get that. You know, I bumped into DJ Christos last week at a movie preview, that Raven Resistance thing. And he had heard the album that morning. He had got the promo, and he came up to me and he's like, man, amazing album. Like, he really, really understood. And I think that comes, I'm assuming it comes with a little bit of age, because what I'm seeing is the youth just are kind of like one-dimensional.
Mm.
Just, it's got to be house. Give me
Right.
a house record, or it's got to be hip-hop. You can't have a bunch of your influences in one sound. And that's how I always grew up. I always grew up listening to, if you were a very big DJ and you released an album of what influenced you. You didn't just release an album of like 12 techno tunes. You know what I mean? So that kind of influence came through very much in putting the album together. So I'm interested to see how the record does locally, and to see if it kind of helps me a little bit more overseas, because I think I'd really like to, I know I'd really like to break through overseas.
It's a myriad of influences, and it's quite cool because they flow really nicely within each other, but it's also quite unexpected because it's your own history.
Mm.
I mean, there's some songs on there that are straight up like Latin bossa, basically, just with a bit more electronic production underneath them. And as somebody who comes from the jazz background, like, that's really cool. And then there's amazing hip hop, and there is stuff that tends more to the housey kind of space, I suppose, within it. I really dug, it sort of opens up, and there's this, there's this, I don't know if it's a speech or if it's from an interview, but it's Zion talking.
Yes.
And he speaks about everything that you were just talking about now, basically like how it fits into the world, and the idea that it doesn't have to follow, and why should music fit into somebody else's idea of rules? It should be a personal expression, and I thought that was really
100%.
beautiful.
And that was so important for me to be the first song, because that kind of leads you into the album of like, this is not trying to be anything else but my experience. And I think that's also one of the things we discuss a lot on my radio show when it comes to artists, is like, there's two types of producers, and I've been on the side of both, or been involved somewhat. Is you get the producers that get into a studio and go, right, how are we gonna make money? So how are we gonna make a hit? So what is radio into at the moment? How do we work that, and how do we get into that pipeline? Then you get guys who go into a studio and think about nothing else but their experience and how you can put that out through your craft. And I was literally last week with someone who's very big in the radio space. Their music gets played a lot on radio. And he was playing me his music, and I was like, well, check out my record. Like, I don't think you're going to find a radio hit on there, because I didn't go into the production process with that thinking. It's just about my experience. So very, very nervous and excited to see how it's received. But at the end of the day, that's what art is. You just have to put out what you feel, and hopefully you can make an impact.
And the interludes are beautiful as well. Sio, the singer, songwriter, poet.
Sio smashed it, man.
There's a couple of them that sort of just flow throughout the album. And I suppose those, did you give her topics to write about that you felt were important to express? How did that work?
So the album has got so many styles and genres and tempos. I needed something to break it up, or it was just gonna be a bit too jarring between songs. So interludes have always been a thing. I mean, I've always, being a music fan, you listen to albums and interludes and how it tells a story. Perfect example for me is Solange's, not her record from this year, from 2 years ago. That's a story, man. I mean, I think that took like a good couple of years to make that, but she was very, very involved in making sure that one song led into another with a story, and the interludes really kind of were the glue. And I found it very important that I told my story of love for music and what I'm portraying in the record through these interludes. And Sio is just an incredible writer. So what I'd do is I'd give her music and make sure that it's not super long, like a minute and a half, and a theme. And she's a poet, and she can write, which not everyone's got that skill. And she killed it, man. First take. I mean, she did In Love, which I won't give away, as an interlude, which is actually on some of the DJ pool results. that's come across as like one of the strongest tracks, and it's an interlude. And then she did a spoken word piece about moving to a different beat, so not being conformed to what people expect you to like. And yeah, I can't wait for Sio's album. That's coming soon.
Yeah, me neither. But I really think this project's good. I mean, I appreciate you allowing me to listen to it before it came out. And I think that obviously you're going to be super nervous about it and really anxious and wondering how it's going to go. Also because considering how long it took you to actually bring an album out, considering how long you've been doing this.
I mean, I've put out a lot of records in my life, but they've all been comps.
Your own.
Exactly, my own thing. And I think it was going to be an EP. There were so many changes, and then it was just like, I need to put an album out. And like I said, the feedback that I've got from my peers, which does include a lot of my peers in this country, including Christos, Vinny, China, Sculptured Music, the list goes on, confirms that it's a good record, and that's made me happy. Then overseas, it's again a lot of my peers, people that I grew up listening to their music, really enjoy my album. But I suppose to me, it's the nervousness of everyone in between. So we're going to see how that kind of, and I sometimes think I shouldn't really care, but I suppose I do. You know, I mean,
it's impossible not to care at all.
Yeah, I want to be able to represent what I do, and I want to be able to change people's perceptions, and I think that's what this record is. It's a brave record, and especially in the South African dance scene, because I've put out dance records for, I don't know, 15 years. I've been at the forefront of putting other people's music out, and this is so not that. So I know what people will expect, and I know what I've put out. So there is that kind of nervousness as to it is very different to what people consume, but I'm hoping that can change people's perceptions and maybe allow people to be a little bit more open to lots of music.
To sort of break the fourth wall down a little bit. So obviously before we had this chat, I checked out a lot of the other Ballantines State True Music Series interviews that you've done.
Yeah.
And for me, what was cool about it is that there's not a hell of a lot of long-form documentation of people's careers, South African artists' careers, who have incredible stories to tell. And I enjoyed that because, you know, one day when we're all said and done, this will be something we can look back on as like an archive, as a place to look at how people thought about things and where they were coming from and what they were about. And I'd sort of wondered what your experience of doing this has been like.
It's been incredible, man. I mean, this is something that I really brought to my radio show, except you weren't seeing it. So it was very much like a audio experience. So every single week you would tune in and you'd be able to learn someone's story, someone's hardships possibly, and be inspired, and then followed by music. Whereas this was taking you to an environment where these people function, and these people make money, and these people kind of execute their craft. So having discussions with people that have not had a lot of documentation, who I believe and I know will be very big in the future, is important to me, and have these documented and filmed where I'm talking to someone like Pierre Johnson or FK Amash or Cat LeCat, who I'm telling you now in 5 years' time are going to be household names. And like I got in there first and was able to, in a way, inspire some people through their stories. I know it's not been easy for some of these guys, but they're very dedicated to their craft, and they're very dedicated to showcasing and doing what they need to do to make themselves fulfilled. And I want to be able to tell those stories. So it's been an incredible platform for me to share people's stories, and more than that, just share what they do. It's becoming quite a big thing, obviously, with Boiler Room on a global scale, but a big thing in South Africa to be able to put on someone's DJ set and watch the whole thing. And this comes with that. It gets to showcase people's talents. I mean, there's Hit Refresh DSTV channel, which is DJs every single Friday. and that trends like within the top 3, just out of guys in a room with a camera DJing, and this is kind of like, excuse me, a little bit more, it's that with the backbone, with the story, with this is where I come from, these are my influences, this is why I do it. And it was a really nice balance of having the guys that are coming up and then talking to people that have been in it forever. So the discussion I had with Vinny was probably one of my favorites, because I got Vinny to tell stories that I'd never heard before, which I'm sure a lot of people have never heard before, you know. Stories of how he came up from Pretoria, going to the clubs in Johannesburg and being scared. And so it was a really nice balance, and I think inspiring for a lot of people in this country that want to get into this game. They've got to realize and see for themselves that these guys are not all glitzy and glammy. They're coming from the same place. They're just dedicated. And hopefully these interviews and these podcasts and these videos that we've put together can inspire a generation moving forward.
Yeah, because, you know, as much as we're friends, I have an incredible amount of respect for what you've done. And I know, working in this industry, how difficult it is a lot of the time to do something uncompromisingly. It genuinely is. There's 1,000 reasons not to, but there's the reward at the end of it that I get to see through a career like yours is obviously something that makes it all worthwhile. So that's why it was fantastic for me to be able to, we speak a lot, but to be able to kind of sort of map out your whole career and get your understanding of why you've done what you've done has been a personal indulgence, but one I think as well that will mean a lot to a lot of people.
You were the right person to do it, man.
I was, Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick.
It's a pleasure. Do we shake hands, or that can look bad?
Do we shake hands?
What do we do?
Ah, no.
We don't. Oh, we cheers.
Of course.
Ballantines.
So let me tell you the power of this music.
It's what I live for.
It's a connection.
It's positive energy. Ready for the ride? I'll see you in the queue. This sound is worth fighting for. We hear you, people. We're standing up for true music.
Not for persons under the age of 18. Enjoy responsibly.
poisonous, poisonous delusions. How soothing were you when you say I could kiss all of my resistance goodbye. Goodbye, 'cause you looked it into me. Forbidden, forbidden, drink from the foreign cup filled with a foreign lust. You bring forbiddenness, forbiddenness, forbidden. Drink from the foreign cup, bring forth a foreign lust. We are forbidden, forbidden, forbidden. Forbidden. Forbidden.
mindset together, where all stereotypes can be broken. Music is where a revolution can happen.
we need to get to a place where we're undefined, where music is just music and it's not even about the genre, it's just about the feeling and just creating what feels good to you, you know. And I think that's what, especially youth coming up right now, the bedroom producers who are making great music, don't get caught up in what people tell you they think you should be making. Make what feels good to you. Make what you can go to bed at night and feel good about making, you know. That's what's important. It's not about the title or the genre. It's just about the feeling.
Bye.